Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We are back on House Bill 2036. Madam Chair, I know there's been a lot of discussions, and I'm excited to be here, and hopefully we can kick out a good product. I know the House sent over Senate Bill 300. The Senate sent us Senate Bill 539 and House Bill 2036. We've been having some conversations between ourselves. I've been having conversations with House members, and I think we're close to hopefully finding a good compromise between all of these packages. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to start out kind of with the base provisions, if we want to talk from a starting point in House Bill 2036. And Madam Chair, I think at first might be easiest just to cover the things that we are agreeing on and some of the similarities that we had between Senate Bill 300 and House Bill 2036.
That would be great, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. As I compare the two, yes, Senator Holland. Yes. Yes. Okay, looking through in comparison, I think one thing that it's pretty apparent both chambers are in agreement on is the elimination of income tax on Social Security benefits, the acceleration of the statewide food sales tax to zero on July 1st.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, you're starting with the easy ones that we all
Yes.
agree on. Okay.
Yes, getting those off the table, and then we'll end. I do want to make a few changes. I mean, the income tax one is going to be the interesting one, but a few of these other provisions I do want to just get off the table here, or on the table. I guess it depends on how you're looking at that. But so we're in agreement, or it appears to be in agreement on the Social Security piece and the food sales tax. Also, one of the pieces that we've always looked at is the banking, the privilege tax for banks and financial institutions. I know we've kind of been back and forth on that. We all agree that needs to happen, but one thing I did recognize is technically the banking fees were to mirror the Apex language, and currently we only have one that is officially certified. So one offer just to help cut a little bit of the cost here and be aware of the fiscal impact would be to go ahead and just make that first year or that first reduction as it has been certified through the Apex plans for those banking fees. And I think that cuts that fiscal note essentially in half for that line item, as Eddie is nodding. So I would like to make that part of kind of the initial offer with those agreed upon provisions. And I guess looking at some of the differences between the package, Madam Chair, with our first offer, I would like the Senate to consider or reconsider the drop or the reduction in the statewide mill levy from 20 to 18, but retaining the $100,000 increase or the increase to $100,000 in the personal exemption. That's a pretty good one. The residential exemption. I don't want to go overboard with offers, so I might see if you want to consider that so far and see where we land.
Yeah, could you give us a quick minute? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm assuming on your income tax rate, you're still at 565. Would that, or where are you at on the income tax brackets?
Well, I hadn't, yeah, we were just going to assume the current brackets as they were in the bill.
Okay.
That was, I'm not sure, all the other provisions were part of the offer. I just wanted to make sure we were clear on the Social Security, the food sales tax, the privilege tax, and the property tax.
Okay, we will agree to at this time, without knowing where you are on other provisions, to accepting the Social Security, the privilege, and the food. And then we'd like to hear more detail about where you're at before we accept the 20 to 18, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
If, Mr. Chairman, if you're at the current income tax brackets in 2036, I guess what we could counter with that part on the 20 mil, what we'd like to see is instead of 20 mil, we go to 19.5 and we buy down the income tax brackets to 5.55 and the middle bracket to 5.15 and then the lower bracket to 2.5, if you would consider.
Okay, just to make sure, there was a lot of fives there. So the top bracket would go to 5.55, the middle bracket is 5.15, and the bottom bracket would be to 2.5?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, if you'd be patient for just a minute, I need to clarify some numbers with Eddie.
That would be great. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I kind of thought something like this might happen, so I wanted to double check. I'd had Eddie run some numbers for me. I just wanted to double check before I made the offer, but we appreciate the willingness to take a look at reducing or changing the rates. A little hesitant on the 19.5 mils, but I would like to counter with another offer. Rather than reducing the the bottom rate to 2.5, continuing to kind of use the House's structure that we had in Senate Bill 300 of getting rid of that bottom bracket. An idea that I really liked out of Senate Bill 539, I thought it was brilliant, was the personal exemption. The large increase that the Senate had proposed, that does so much for families. At first, when I heard it, I kind of wrote it off until I understood how it worked, because I thought it was an increase for everybody, and I thought, wow, how can we afford that? Because the personal exemption, as it works now, you get one exemption for every member of your household. The way the Senate had created that, though, you get one exemption rate for the single filer, double that for the married filing joint, but then you get a little bit of a bump from the current rate for those dependents. So you have essentially multiple different rates. When I looked at the math, I really liked how that worked. And so I did have Eddie kind of keeping track of the numbers to make sure that nobody gets a tax increase. I want to make sure that this works right to get rid of that bottom bracket completely. And if you need some time to think about this, or if there's questions for Eddie, I did want to propose going ahead and taking that first bracket at 2.5, completely getting rid of that. It's not at 0%. We will be eliminating that bracket now. And according to the math, in order to do that, the personal exemption rate would be $9,100 for a single filer, $18,200 for married or a joint filer, and then the dependent rate would be $2,320. And with those numbers, Madam Chair, I would propose that we take off the indexing. That large of a number tends to grow pretty fast in the out years. When we were considering indexing the standard deduction, personal exemption on the lower current rates, that didn't grow quite as fast. So the other piece of that, since we are completely removing that bottom bracket, the new thresholds for the rate change from 515 to 555 would be $23,000 for a single filer and $46,000 for a joint filer. And I might look to Eddie to make sure, did I say everything correctly there?
I just want to clarify that did you say tax rates in the midst of that? The revisor just reminded me of that. You've got two brackets. Can you restate, just for staff's benefit, the rates of the upper and lower bracket that will have an additional structure?
That's using the rates on the upper bracket as the Senate had proposed of 5.15 and 5.55.
Okay. Yeah, that is my understanding, is with the 23 and the 46, that kind of add to amount, the tax at the break-even point there is $1,184.50 for a single filer, and doubling that to $2,369 for a married filer. That's basically the tax in the lower bracket, and then everything above that becomes the upper bracket. And those are, the numbers you recited were my understanding of what we had just visited about.
Yes, so that's what I had written down. I just wanted to clarify that with you. And Madam Chair, I do also want to, for staff's benefit and ours, currently we have this little cliff in our income tax code at $2,500 and $5,000. With this change, that first dollar would be subject to taxation, but it would be a significant increase. There's a lot of your Kansas adjusted gross income that would not be subject to taxation. So nobody's getting a tax increase, but we're trying to eliminate that little tax cliff that we have in the tax code.
Mr. Chairman, that is much appreciated. Ironically, I had asked the Senate President if we can consider something like that before we even heard your offer. So I just can't tell you how happy I am to hear that offer. So thank you. So we do need to go vote. Could we, I hate to, oh, no, go ahead. Do you want to, we could finish this up really quickly. I think we're so close on this, if we accept that. And So, Mr. Chairman, if we
Yes.
accept that, and would you accept the 19.5 mil then in order to help the fiscal note? I think that,
I think we would have to.
okay.
Yes, Madam Chair, and Eddie just reminded me, part of what my offer should have been earlier was also taking the, with that sharp increase in the personal exemption, we would ask the Senate to consider the House's position on the standard deduction. Your position was the 10,000, 7,500, and 5,000, I believe. Just to keep an eye on that fiscal note, would ask that you consider taking the House's position, keeping the current rates with that initial 3% increase, and then taking off the indexing at this time. We can always come back and put the indexing on at a later time, just
Mr.
to help
Chairman,
out the
that makes
fiscal note.
perfect sense, especially with the personal exemption increase. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
With that, do you want to go vote and come back, or do you want to try to wrap this up?
I think we're fairly close. Is there any other differences?
The only thing I want to make the clarification on is we have passed Senate Bill 96 across our floor. I'm not sure if you have yet or not, but that has the child and dependent care tax credit. I would suggest taking this out of this language because we already have it just about across the finish line.
I think that would be excellent.
It's a good thing we have staff because I knew I'd forget something. The offer, I can't remember if it was contained in 2036, but abolishing the local ad valorem tax reduction fund and the city-county revenue sharing fund, but retaining the special city-county highway fund demand transfer, but not putting any funds in there. I know Senate Bill 300 had 11.5 million in that highway fund with the abolishment of the other two demand transfers, but our proposal would be to keep the abolishment of the two demand transfers, keeping the highway fund on the books, but again, not funding it just due to the overall cost of the package.
Mr. Chairman, I do realize that was a provision in Senate Bill 300. We did like the funding mechanism, but we understand we really shouldn't be doing that in a tax bill. So I appreciate that, and we would take the language on it. Yeah.
You're right. We could do that in omnibus.
Yes, I think so. I don't want to see funding starting in tax, although we saw tax bills and I don't know how many other committees.
I might look to staff and see if there's any further clarification that might.
Staff, we think that we're all set, but would you like me to do a recap of this?
Do you have time?
Yes, we need
Okay.
to.
Okay. So I'll start with, probably I'll go through the easier ones to describe. The first one I'll announce is the full exemption of the Social Security income from the individual income tax effective tax year 24. Next, the reduction of the privilege tax rate. That will be a kind of so-called single-step reduction effective in tax year 24 as well, because you had mentioned lining that up with the corporate rate attributable to Apex. Next would be the repeal of the LAVTRF and CCRSF and the elimination of the transfers from the state general fund to those funds. The next would be the increase of the amount of the appraised value of the residential property exempt from the statewide uniform school finance levy to $100,000, the elimination of the formula to provide for future increases to that, and a reduction of the mill levy to 19.5 mills. The last easy provision to describe is the acceleration of the elimination of the state sales and compensating use tax on food and food ingredients to July 1st of this year, and of course the acceleration of the associated change in distribution of revenue percentages with the state highway fund. The ones that are a bit more difficult to describe are kind of twofold. I guess the first one's very easy to threefold. The first one's very easy to describe, and that is an increase to the standard deduction amounts. It would be a 3% increase, and I am looking really quickly to see if I have those on a piece of paper in front of me. It would be $3,605 for single filers, $8,240 for married joint filers, and $6,180 for the head of household filers. And there would not include the indexing in any future years in this bill for that provision. The next change that I'm going to try to describe this all conceptually together is that it would change Kansas to a two-bracket income tax structure. Those two brackets would be 5.15% for the lower bracket and 5.55% for the upper bracket. The lower bracket would be $0 to $23,000 for single filers and $0 to $46,000 for married joint filers. In accordance with that, there would be increases to the personal exemption amounts, and also a change in approach to personal exemption amounts. We would provide for a single filer personal exemption amount of $9,100, a married joint filer personal exemption amount of $18,200, and each dependent listed on the return would receive would be allowed a personal exemption amount of $2,320. And I believe I've recapped. Oh, and the other thing that similar to the standard deduction, no indexing on any of those personal exemption amounts. Those, just as has been Kansas's practice now for many years, the personal exemption and standard deduction amounts would be fixed in statute.
Yeah, can you explain the bracket change? I guess I don't understand that part.
So currently beginning at $0, income is taxed at 3.1%. For singles at 15, it's taxed at 5.25, and then at 30, 5.7. And then we do have those thresholds in there at 2,500 for singles and 5,000 for joint returns that zero out any positive liability. This would change it to where beginning at $1 of taxable income is taxed at 5.15%, and then at $23,001 for single filers, income is taxed at 5.55%. The personal exemption increases, in essence, structurally replace the zero bracket that was present in House sub for Senate Bill 300, to where in terms of the impact for taxpayers is pretty comparable, but they get that increased income that is not taxed occurs by virtue of the personal exemption as opposed to by virtue of a 0% bracket. And that's why the 23,000 kind of bracket range instead of the next one starting at 30,000 relative to SB 300, because it's about $7,000 that is shifted over into the personal exemption instead of currently incurred instead of under SB 300 taxed at the 0% rate. Does that? It does sound confusing to describe. I think if you looked at it graphically, it would, in a perfect world, I would have something like that to show you. But I think if you looked at it graphically, it might show that it's structurally pretty comparable in terms of the effect to taxpayers as the 0% bracket.
We do need to, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Eddie, we do need to go up and vote, and we would like to get a grasp of this. Eddie, if you could put a sheet together and we could come down after we vote. I'm not sure you could pull something together that quick. You do work magic, though, so would that be okay,
Yes, that
Mr.
would be
Chairman?
great.
Okay, we'll be right back then.
Yes.
We plan on running this across both floors tonight.
Hopefully.
That's up to leadership, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It'll probably depend on how quickly we can get it drafted.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your grace and letting us digest, kind of come together. I do have a question, if you don't mind, for Eddie.
Certainly.
Okay, and it is, Eddie, I'm trying to understand, I want to make sure I have a clear example. Could you give us an idea with the brackets
Yeah,
change?
what we had talked about was the impact of this on a family of four, specifically since under current law, the lowest marginal rate is 3.1%, the lowest bracket rate, and under this, it would be 5.15%, and so that might strike you as though that is a tax increase. However, by virtue of the personal exemption increase, it works out to where it isn't. And so I'll kind of walk through how that works exactly. Under this hypothetical family of four, our current personal exemption amount is $2,250. So you would multiply that by 4, you'd get to $9,000. Their standard deduction, because we're assuming for the sake of this that they take the standard deduction, obviously if they itemize, this number would be even higher. Their standard deduction is $8,000, and so they don't start paying tax until their adjusted gross income exceeds $17,000 for a family of four. Because that's when their taxable income could be positive. And so currently they would start paying 3.1% there. Of course, we actually also have the $5,000 low income exclusion threshold. So it's really more like $22,000. And at $22,001, they have a $155 tax impact. That's the cliff that the House chair referred to earlier. Under this proposal, that family would have a personal exemption amount of $18,200 by virtue of being a married joint return. They would have an additional personal exemption amount of $4,640 attributable to the two dependents. And so their combined personal exemption amount would be $22,840. They would then have the standard deduction amount of $8,240, so they wouldn't begin paying income until their adjusted gross income reached at least 30, I've got a sum problem wrong here. It's $31,080, and then beginning at $31,081, they would pay tax at a rate of 5.15% for the next $46,000 of income, and then after that, it would jump up to 5.55% for the whole rest of their income. And so that, I think that is the kind of, and the difference between when that tax starts in terms of their adjusted gross income is why, even though the bottom bracket rate is higher, this tax plan would still mathematically be a tax reduction for all Kansas taxpayers. It's actually somewhat similar in concept to what we've seen in plenty of other bills. It's similar in concept to the 0% bracket that was in Senate Bill 300. There were untaxed taxable income provisions that had somewhat of a similar effect in some of the other tax bills that we've seen. But it does work out to where even though that lower rate is higher, it is still a net tax reduction because the tax doesn't kick in until a higher income point.
Excellent.
Madam Chair, I did have one thing that Representative Sawyer had when we broke the first time. He was doing some good math over here on the back of his paper. One thing I didn't calculate when I made that offer, and I double-checked my numbers with Eddie, you'd made the offer of moving that middle bracket to 5.15. When I had calculated those numbers, it was kind of a break even at the 5.2. So if we want to make sure that everybody is getting at least as much benefit, if not more, we did do the numbers just right quick, and we calculated that personal exemption number, instead of 9,118.2, which are nice round numbers, but it probably needs to be more accurate at 9,160. We have to add $60 to that, and 18,320, double that $60 to put on the personal exemption.
And the dependent would stay at 2320?
Yes, I think the dependent piece would, stay the same, yes.
Would you repeat the brackets where at 555 and,
5.15.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's where we calculated that little error. It only amounts to about $3 or $4 of tax, but we wanted to be able to say that this is just as good, if not better, for everybody.
that's been our goal all along, is a tax cut for everyone. I think we're looking at some really good policy here. And, Mr. Chairman, we will accept your offer.
Okay, is there any clarification that staff needs on, there's a lot of information we just talked about here, so.
And staff just wanted to clarify, all of the income tax provisions go into effect in tax year '24. That was my understanding as we walked all the way through that, but we do just want to clarify that.
That's my intention, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would absolutely agree. I think we've come up with a really good product, back and forth, everybody, a lot of eyes on this, and I just appreciate all the work. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.